My name is Dove Kent, and I am about to tell you the story of how I finally broke free from 26 years of living in someone else's shadow. What began with a phone call on my sister's birthday became the moment I reclaimed my dignity and discovered my true worth. The phone call came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. My mother Pearl's voice carried that artificially sweet tone I had learned to dread over the years. "Dove, honey, it is your sister's birthday today. Come home for dinner, will you? Mom's making one of her special feasts." Those words hit me like a physical blow. The special feast was a tradition in our household. Though tradition might be too generous a word for what amounted to systematic favoritism. This elaborate dinner was always prepared exclusively for my younger sister Grace, complete with perfectly plated gourmet dishes that could feed a small family. Meanwhile, I would receive whatever scraps remained after she had eaten her fill if I was lucky enough to get anything at all. Despite every instinct telling me to decline, I found myself agreeing to come. Perhaps it was some masochistic need to see how far they would push things. Or maybe I was simply tired of running from the inevitable confrontation that had been building for years. When I arrived at their cramped apartment that evening, the scene was exactly what I had expected, yet somehow still managed to disappoint me. Grace sat at the dining table like royalty, dressed in an elaborate white princess gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Before her lay a spread that would have made a five-star restaurant jealous. Perfectly grilled prime rib steaks, Maine lobster tails glistening with butter, and Alaskan king crab legs artfully arranged on bone china. The entire production was being broadcast live to her social media followers, with professional lighting equipment casting harsh shadows across our modest living room. My parents, Luke and Pearl, stood behind her like devoted servants, their faces beaming with pride as Grace performed for her audience. "Good evening, my beautiful followers." Grace cooed into her phone camera, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "Today is my special day, and look at this incredible feast my loving mother has prepared for me." The contrast between her elaborate setup and my designated spot at the far end of the table could not have been more stark. There, pushed to the very corner, sat a chipped ceramic bowl containing nothing but plain white rice. No accompaniments, no garnish, nothing but the basic sustenance one might give to an unwelcome guest. When my mother noticed my arrival, her smile faltered momentarily before she rushed over to pull me aside. "Why are you so late? Can't you see your sister is broadcasting to her fans?" she whispered harshly, her fingers digging into my arm. "You need to go eat in the kitchen so you don't interfere with her image." I watched as the live comments began scrolling across Grace's phone screen. The viewers had noticed me in the background, and their observations cut deeper than I expected. "Wow, the sister looks so plain compared to her." One comment read. "It is like Cinderella and the evil stepsister, but backwards," wrote another. "The older sister seems really sad. I feel bad for her," appeared among the stream of messages. Grace was clearly delighted by the attention this dynamic was generating. She turned to address her audience with perfectly practiced sympathy. "Oh, that is my older sister Dove. She works so hard, poor thing. She hardly ever comes home anymore, but she made a special effort to be here for my birthday." Her words were carefully chosen to paint me as both neglectful and pitiable, while positioning herself as the cherished daughter who deserved all this attention and luxury. My father, Luke, joined the performance, clearing his throat loudly enough for the microphone to pick up his voice. "Dove, what are you standing around for? Go to the kitchen and eat your dinner before it gets cold. Don't disturb your sister's broadcast." He gestured toward my sad bowl of rice as if he were offering me a great gift. "Your mother was thoughtful enough to save you some food." The casual cruelty of it all hit me with stunning clarity. Here they were, performing their version of family happiness for tens of thousands of strangers while treating me like an unwanted intrusion in my own childhood home. They had turned my marginalization into entertainment, my pain into content for their social media empire. But instead of the familiar stab of hurt I usually felt in these moments, something entirely different happened. I began to laugh. The sound started as a quiet chuckle but grew into something that filled the room, cutting through their artificial warmth like a blade through silk. My mother's face darkened immediately. "Stop making a scene and go eat your dinner," she hissed. Grace shot me warning looks while trying to maintain her sweet expression for the camera. Her lips moved silently, mouthing, "Don't cause trouble," with the practiced precision of someone accustomed to controlling every aspect of her public image. Instead of retreating to the kitchen as expected, I walked slowly toward their elaborate dining table. Each step felt deliberate and powerful, as if I were finally claiming space that had always been denied to me. When I reached the table, I carefully set down my purse and reached inside to withdraw something I had been carrying for weeks, waiting for exactly the right moment. The bright red folder containing my newly processed legal documents landed on the table with a satisfying thud, close enough to Grace's expensive meal that she instinctively pulled back. The sound was not particularly loud, but it commanded absolute attention from everyone in the room. My mother was the first to react, her eyes widening as she recognized what I had placed on the table. "Dove, what on earth is that? What are you doing?" Her voice had lost all pretense of maternal warmth, revealing the sharp edge of panic beneath. My father stood frozen, his face cycling through confusion and growing alarm as he tried to process what was happening. Grace's practiced smile had completely disappeared, replaced by genuine shock as she stared at the documents that had appeared so suddenly in the middle of her carefully orchestrated performance. The live comments exploded into chaos. "Wait, what did she just put on the table? Those look like official documents. Is this some kind of legal thing? Oh my God, is this about to get real?" Grace's mother lunged forward, trying to snatch the folder away and hide it from the camera's view. "You've lost your mind. Put that away this instant." She grabbed at the documents, but I pressed my hand down firmly, my strength surprising even myself. I had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. 3 years of working overtime, saving every penny, consulting with lawyers, and navigating bureaucratic red tape. 3 years of planning my escape from a family that had never truly seen me as anything more than a supporting character in their favorite child's story. "Don't worry," I said, my voice unnaturally calm in contrast to the chaos erupting around me. "I just wanted to share some wonderful news with Grace and all her devoted fans on this special occasion." I opened the folder deliberately, making sure the camera could capture every detail as I displayed the first page. The official letterhead was clearly visible, along with the most important line, "Primary resident, Dove Kent, effective immediately." I announced, speaking directly into Grace's phone camera and addressing her tens of thousands of live viewers. "I, Dove Kent, am now legally independent from this household and every person in it. As of today, we share no legal connection, no financial obligations, and no family ties whatsoever." The silence that followed was deafening. Grace's phone nearly slipped from her trembling hands as she stared at me in complete shock, her mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. The live comments had gone from casual entertainment to absolute frenzy. Did she just legally disown her family? This is the most dramatic thing I've ever seen on a live stream. Good for her. This family seems toxic as hell. Sister just dropped the ultimate mic drop. My father was the first to find his voice, his face turning an alarming shade of purple as rage overtook his shock. "You ungrateful little witch, after everything we've done for you, how dare you humiliate us like this?" He pointed a shaking finger at me, spittle flying from his mouth. My mother collapsed into her familiar pattern of dramatic hysteria, clutching her chest and wailing loud enough to be heard clearly over the live stream. "What have I done to deserve this? I raised you, fed you, gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. You are going to kill your poor mother." Their reactions were so predictably theatrical, so perfectly in character with the emotional manipulation I had endured my entire life. But for the first time, their words had no power over me. I felt nothing but a cold, distant amusement as I watched them perform their outrage for an audience that was rapidly turning against them. 26 years of accumulated frustration, humiliation, and suppressed rage suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. I looked at that beautiful table laden with expensive food, at my sister's designer gown, at the bowl of plain rice that represented everything wrong with my place in this family. Without another word, I walked around to the far end of the table and gripped its edge with both hands. Grace seemed to sense what was coming because she screamed and jumped backward, but it was too late. With every ounce of strength I possessed, I flipped the entire table over. The crash was tremendous. Prime rib steaks rolled across the floor, collecting dust and debris. Expensive lobster tails splattered against the wall, leaving greasy stains on the faded wallpaper. The pot of seafood bisque exploded across the room, with a significant portion landing directly on Grace's pristine white gown. Her shriek of horror pierced the air as she stared down at the yellow stains spreading across the fabric. My dress. This is a custom designer piece. Do you have any idea how much this cost? Her voice cracked with genuine anguish, not for any damage to our relationship, but for the material loss. My mother rushed at me with her fingers extended like claws, ready to physically attack me for destroying their perfect tableau. You little beast, you've ruined everything. How could you do this to us? My father grabbed a broom from the corner and raised it like a weapon, his face contorted with fury. I'll teach you some respect, you selfish brat. The entire scene had devolved into absolute chaos, all of it broadcast live to an audience that was watching in fascination and horror. The comments were moving too quickly to read individual messages. But the overall sentiment was clear. The viewers were witnessing something unprecedented and raw. Through it all, I remained completely calm. I surveyed the destruction I had created, the three people who shared my DNA but had never truly been my family, and felt nothing but relief. The weight I had carried for 26 years was finally lifting from my shoulders. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet, extracting a stack of bills and throwing them at Grace's feet. You want compensation. Here, is that enough to cover your precious dress? The money scattered across the floor, some bills landing in the puddles of spilled soup. Grace stared at the cash with wild eyes, her carefully constructed public persona completely shattered. She looked like a child whose favorite toy had been destroyed, unable to comprehend how her perfect little world had suddenly collapsed. I turned to face the camera one final time, knowing that my words would be recorded and shared across social media within hours. For anyone who has been following this family's story, what you've witnessed tonight is the truth they've been hiding. This is how they've treated me for my entire life. I've been their scapegoat, their servant, their convenient target for 26 years. Today, I am not just flipping a table of food. I am overturning 26 years of abuse, neglect, and systematic dehumanization. From this moment forward, I am done. Whether they succeed or fail, live or die, prosper or suffer is no longer my concern. I am finally free. With that declaration, I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. Behind me, my mother's voice rose to a hysterical pitch. Dove, come back here. You can't just leave. You can't just abandon your family after everything we've sacrificed for you. But I was already gone, stepping out into the cool evening air and closing the door on that chapter of my life forever. The night felt different somehow, as if the very atmosphere had changed. Every breath felt cleaner, every sound crisper. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. Back at my small apartment across town, I took the longest, hottest shower of my life. The warm water seemed to wash away not just the physical residue of that terrible dinner, but years of accumulated shame and self-doubt. I put on my most comfortable clothes and settled into my favorite chair, finally ready to see how the world had responded to my dramatic exit. My phone showed dozens of missed calls from numbers I recognized, but would never answer again. Without hesitation, I blocked every contact associated with my former family and their various friends and relatives who might try to guilt me into reconciliation. Social media told a very different story than what I had expected. Instead of criticism for my dramatic behavior, I found overwhelming support from complete strangers who had witnessed the live stream or seen clips shared across various platforms. The hashtag Dove's Revenge was trending nationally, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of family dysfunction and praising my courage in standing up for myself. Someone had compiled a video montage of all the subtle put-downs and dismissive comments my family had made about me during previous broadcasts, creating a clear pattern of emotional abuse that viewers found deeply disturbing. Even more satisfying were the posts analyzing Grace's reaction to the situation. People pointed out that she had shown more concern for her damaged dress than for understanding why her sister might have reached such a breaking point. Her follower count was dropping rapidly as people realized how manufactured her sweet, caring persona had been. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from my supervisor at the marketing firm where I worked. I braced myself for an uncomfortable conversation about my sudden internet fame, but instead received the most surprising news of my career. Dove, I am calling because corporate headquarters in New York has been trying to reach you. They want to offer you a position heading up our new West Coast expansion project. The pay increase is substantial, and it comes with full relocation assistance. I sat in stunned silence, processing this information. I had been working at a small regional branch of a much larger company, doing good work but never expecting to be noticed by the executives who made major decisions. They specifically requested you, my supervisor continued. Apparently, your innovative approach to social media marketing has caught their attention. Plus, your recent demonstration of personal strength and integrity has convinced them that you are exactly the kind of leader they need for this challenging new venture. Personal strength and integrity. Those were words no one in my family had ever used to describe me. Yet here were complete strangers recognizing qualities in me that I was only beginning to acknowledge in myself. The job offer was everything I could have dreamed of and more. A senior management position with a company I genuinely respected, enough money to live comfortably without constantly worrying about expenses. And most importantly, the chance to start completely fresh in a new city where no one knew my history. I accepted the position that very day. 3 weeks later, I was boarding a plane to Portland, Oregon, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a future full of possibilities. As the plane lifted off, I watched my old city disappear beneath the clouds and felt no sadness whatsoever. I was leaving behind everything that had held me back and flying toward the life I had always been meant to live. The Portland office was everything the corporate recruiters had promised. Modern, dynamic, filled with creative professionals who valued innovation and results over office politics or family connections. My new colleagues welcomed me warmly, and I quickly discovered that my reputation had preceded me in the best possible way. The story of my dramatic family confrontation had spread through professional networks, where it was viewed as evidence of my integrity and unwillingness to compromise my values. My first major project involved partnering with several local companies to develop integrated marketing campaigns. The most significant of these partnerships was with Morrison Industries, a family-owned business empire that had dominated the Pacific Northwest market for 3 generations. I was excited about the collaboration until I walked into our first planning meeting and found myself face-to-face with someone I never expected to see again. Nicholas Morrison sat at the head of the conference table, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. He was undeniably handsome, with the kind of refined features that suggested generations of good breeding and expensive education. But there was something in his eyes that I recognized immediately, the casual arrogance of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. I knew exactly who he was because I had seen his face countless times on Grace's social media posts. He was the wealthy older man she had been dating, or at least claiming to date, for the better part of 2 years. She had posted endless photos of expensive gifts he had supposedly given her, exotic trips they had allegedly taken together, and romantic dinners at Portland's most exclusive restaurants. Whether their relationship was genuine or merely a business arrangement designed to boost her public image, He had been instrumental in funding the lifestyle that my family had used to make me feel inadequate. The irony of now meeting him as an equal in a professional setting was not lost on me. Nicholas clearly recognized me as well, though he seemed uncertain about where he might have seen me before. His initial presentation was professionally polished, but ultimately shallow, full of corporate buzzwords and generic strategies that showed little understanding of the specific market we were trying to reach. When he finished speaking, I leaned forward and addressed him directly. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate the time your team has put into this presentation, but I have to ask, is this really the best your organization can do? The room fell silent. His associates shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, clearly unused to anyone challenging their boss so directly. I am sorry, he said, his voice carrying a hint of offense. Your proposal shows a fundamental misunderstanding of our target demographic. I continued calmly. You are applying outdated strategies that might have worked 5 years ago, but today's consumers are far more sophisticated. If we proceed with your current plan, we'll be wasting everyone's time and money. Nicholas's expression darkened slightly, but he maintained his composure. Miss Kent, I appreciate your directness. Perhaps we could discuss your concerns in more detail over dinner tonight. I find that business conversations often benefit from a more relaxed atmosphere. There it was, the automatic assumption that any professional disagreement from a woman could be resolved through personal charm and an expensive meal. I had encountered this attitude countless times throughout my career, but never from someone whose personal life had intersected with my family's dysfunction. That won't be necessary, Mr. Morrison. If you'd like to revise your proposal based on the market research data I'll be sending your team this afternoon, we can reconvene next week. Otherwise, I am sure we can find other partners who are more serious about achieving actual results. I stood and gathered my materials, noting the shocked expressions around the table. As I reached the door, I turned back to deliver one final observation. Oh, and Mr. Morrison, in the future, I'd recommend that your company exercise more discretion in choosing spokesperson partnerships. Public associations with individuals of questionable character can seriously damage a brand's reputation, especially in today's social media environment. I left him to puzzle over that comment while I returned to my office to begin researching alternative partnership opportunities. I had no intention of working with someone whose business practices were as questionable as his personal relationships, regardless of how profitable the collaboration might be. 2 hours later, my assistant informed me that Nicholas Morrison was in the lobby requesting an immediate meeting. I was tempted to refuse, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see how he would handle being challenged by someone he couldn't intimidate or manipulate. He entered my office with noticeably less swagger than he had displayed in the conference room. His perfectly styled hair was slightly mussed, and there were stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been visible earlier. Miss Kent, I believe there has been some kind of misunderstanding, he began, attempting to regain his authoritative tone. I don't think so, I replied, not inviting him to sit. Your presentation was inadequate, your strategy was outdated, and your attitude was unprofessional. There is nothing unclear about that assessment. He studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him trying to place where he had seen me before. When recognition finally dawned, his expression shifted from confusion to something much more complex. You are Grace's sister, he said quietly. I corrected. That relationship ended several months ago, along with my connection to everything and everyone associated with that family. The silence stretched between us as he processed this information. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to reconcile the confident executive sitting across from him with whatever image Grace had painted of her downtrodden older sister. I see, he said finally. That explains your comment about questionable character, does it? I asked. I was referring to your company's apparent inability to properly vet your business partners, but I suppose you could interpret it however you like. His jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. Miss Kent, I think you may have the wrong impression about my relationship with Grace. Our arrangement was purely professional. She provided social media promotion for some of our lifestyle brands, and we compensated her accordingly. Your personal life is none of my business, Mr. Morrison. However, your professional competence very much is. The proposal your team presented today suggests that Morrison Industries may not be the right fit for our expansion goals. I could see him struggling to adapt to a situation where his usual advantages, wealth, connections, masculine authority, carried no weight. For perhaps the first time in his privileged life, he was being evaluated purely on merit, and he was coming up short. "Give us another chance," he said, and I was surprised to hear a note of genuine humility in his voice. "Let me put together a team that actually understands your vision. I promise you'll see a very different level of work." Something in his tone made me pause. Despite everything I knew about his character, there was a sincerity in that moment that seemed authentic. Maybe it was just good acting, or maybe being challenged had sparked some rarely accessed sense of professional pride. "You have 1 week," I said finally. "If your next presentation isn't significantly better, this conversation is over permanently." He nodded, standing to leave. As he reached the door, he turned back. "For what it is worth, Miss Kent, I am beginning to understand why Grace was always so intimidated by you." Before I could ask what he meant by that comment, he was gone, leaving me alone with far more questions than answers. The week that followed was one of the most professionally satisfying of my career. Word had somehow spread through Portland's business community that Morrison Industries was scrambling to impress the new executive from the East Coast company. Several other potential partners reached out, eager to propose alternative collaborations that might be more appealing than whatever Nicholas could offer. I spent my days evaluating proposals, touring facilities, and meeting with local business leaders who were surprisingly welcoming to someone they viewed as a rising star in their industry. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, making important decisions, commanding respect, and building something meaningful through my own efforts. My evenings were quieter, but no less fulfilling. I explored Portland's vibrant neighborhoods, discovered amazing restaurants I could actually afford with my new salary, and began decorating the beautiful apartment my company had arranged for me. Everything felt fresh and full of possibility. On Friday afternoon, Nicholas returned with a completely different team and a presentation that exceeded my highest expectations. Gone were the generic strategies and corporate clichés, replaced by detailed market analysis, innovative campaign concepts, and a timeline that showed they had clearly taken my feedback seriously. "This is much better," I admitted when they finished. "Your research is thorough, your approach is creative, and your budget projections are realistic. I am impressed." Relief washed over Nicholas's face, though he tried to maintain his professional composure. "Does this mean Morrison Industries will be your preferred partner for the expansion project?" I leaned back in my chair, considering. The proposal was genuinely excellent, and working with them would likely produce the best results for my company. But I couldn't shake my reservations about trusting someone whose judgment had led him to become involved with my former family. "Your professional work speaks for itself," I said carefully. "However, I still have concerns about your organization's decision-making processes. The Grace situation suggests a pattern of poor judgment that could affect our partnership." Nicholas's composure finally cracked slightly. "Miss Kent, I understand your concerns, but that situation is completely resolved. All ties between Morrison Industries and Grace have been permanently severed. I can provide written documentation of that if necessary." "Why?" I asked bluntly. "What changed your mind about her?" He was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to reveal. "I saw the video," he said finally. "The one where you stood up to your family. It made me realize that I had been seeing only what I wanted to see, not what was actually there." "And what did you want to see?" "Someone who reminded me of someone I lost a long time ago," he said quietly. "It was unfair to Grace, and it was unfair to the memory of the person I was trying to replace. But mostly it was just pathetic." There was something raw in his admission that caught me off guard, for the first time since I had met him. Nicholas seemed like a real person rather than a caricature of entitled wealth. "I'll consider your proposal," I said, "but I'll need a few days to make my final decision." As his team filed out of the conference room, Nicholas lingered behind. "Miss Kent, could I ask you something?" I nodded, curious about what he might want to know. "In that video, when you flipped the table, was that the first time you had ever stood up to them like that?" "Yes," I said simply. "What took you so long?" The question was so unexpected and so perceptive that I found myself answering honestly. I didn't think I was worth defending. He studied my face for a moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. "They really did a number on you, didn't they?" "They tried to," I replied, "but they didn't succeed." "No," he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "They definitely didn't succeed." After he left, I sat alone in the conference room thinking about that strange conversation. There had been something different about Nicholas when he wasn't performing the role of successful businessman or entitled playboy. Something more genuine and considerably more interesting. But I had learned too much about the dangers of confusing professional respect with personal attraction. Whatever complexity Nicholas Morrison might possess as an individual, my focus needed to remain on building the career that represented my freedom from the past. I approved the Morrison Industries partnership 3 days later, purely based on the merits of their proposal. It was the right decision for my company and for the people whose jobs depended on the success of our expansion project. What I didn't anticipate was how much I would enjoy working with Nicholas over the weeks that followed. Stripped of the arrogance that had characterized our first meeting, he proved to be intelligent, creative, and surprisingly willing to defer to my expertise when our opinions differed. Our professional relationship gradually developed into something that felt like friendship, though I remained carefully guarded about anything too personal. We worked long hours together, shared meals while reviewing campaign materials, and discovered that we had similar tastes in everything from architecture to literature. It was during one of these working dinners that he brought up Grace again. "Can I ask you something about your sister?" he said as we reviewed final budget numbers. "Former sister," I corrected automatically. "Right, former sister. I've been wondering how much of what she told me about you was true." I set down my pen and looked at him directly. "What did she tell you? That you were jealous of her success? That you had always resented her for being prettier and more popular? That you were bitter because you couldn't find a boyfriend and blamed her for taking all the attention?" Genuinely amused by how completely Grace had misunderstood both my motivations and my priorities. "Nicholas, I was never jealous of Grace. I was exhausted by her. There is a difference." "What do you mean?" "I spent 26 years being told that my only value was in making her look better by comparison. Every achievement I earned, every goal I reached, every success I had was immediately overshadowed by whatever Grace wanted next. I wasn't jealous of her life. I was desperate to have my own." He was quiet for a moment, processing this perspective. "She made it sound like you were the problem in the family, like you were selfish and ungrateful." That narrative served her purposes. If I was the problem, then she didn't have to examine whether there might be something wrong with a system that required one child to be diminished, so the other could shine. "I am beginning to think I never really knew her at all," he said softly. "You knew the version of herself she wanted you to see. That is not necessarily the same thing as knowing the real person." Our conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. The caller ID showed my old supervisor from the East Coast office. "Dove, I am sorry to call so late, but I thought you should know. Your former family has been trying to contact the company. They're claiming you stole money from them, or something equally ridiculous. HR wanted me to give you a heads up in case they escalate their complaints." My stomach dropped. I had hoped that my legal independence would be enough to keep them at a permanent distance. But apparently they were still trying to find ways to drag me back into their dysfunction. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "The truth. That you are an exemplary employee whose personal life is none of our business, and that any further harassment will result in legal action." "But Dove," they sounded pretty desperate. You might want to be extra careful for a while. After I hung up, Nicholas was watching me with concern. Everything all right? I explained the situation briefly, trying to downplay my anxiety about what my family might do next. They had already lost everything they cared about: Grace's career, their comfortable lifestyle, their social status, and desperate people sometimes made dangerous choices. You could stay at my place for a while, Nicholas offered. I have excellent security, and it might be safer than being alone if they decide to come looking for you. I was touched by the gesture, but I knew it would be a mistake to blur the professional boundaries we had established. Thank you, but I'll be fine. They're mostly just noise and drama. The legal documentation should keep them at bay. But as I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that my past was about to collide with my carefully constructed new life in ways I wasn't prepared to handle. I was right to be worried. The next morning, I arrived at my office to find Grace sitting in the reception area. She looked terrible. The designer clothes and professional makeup that had defined her public image were gone, replaced by wrinkled discount store clothing and an expression of barely controlled desperation. She had clearly been crying, and her hands shook as she stood up to face me. "Dove, please. I need to talk to you." Every instinct told me to call security and have her removed immediately, but something about her appearance made me hesitate. This wasn't the manipulative performer who had tormented me for years. This was someone who looked genuinely broken. 5 minutes, I said. In my office, she followed me inside and immediately broke down in tears. "I am so sorry. I know you have every right to hate me, but I am desperate. Mom and Dad lost the house. We're living in a one-room apartment, and they fight constantly about money. The debt collectors call every day. I can't get any work because of what happened on the live stream." I sat behind my desk, unmoved by her emotional display. "What do you want?" "Grace, I need your help. You are successful now, and you always were smart with money. If you could just lend us enough to get back on our feet, I promise I'll pay you back. I'll do anything. Anything except take responsibility for the choices that led to this situation," I observed. She flinched but pressed on. "I know I was terrible to you. I know Mom and Dad were unfair, but we're family. Doesn't that mean anything?" "We were never family," I said calmly. "We were people who happened to share living space for a portion of our lives. Family implies mutual care, respect, and support. We never had any of those things, so you are just going to let us suffer?" she asked, her voice rising with a familiar note of accusation. "I am going to let you experience the consequences of your own actions, just like I had to do for 26 years. Grace's tears turned to anger, revealing the person I remember beneath her current desperation. "You always thought you were better than us. You always acted like we owed you something just because you worked harder in school. I never thought I was better than you, Grace. I thought I was different from you, and I was right." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Fine. But don't think this is over. Nicholas might be impressed by your little executive act. But I know who you really are. You are still that sad, jealous girl who could never be good enough. You are right about one thing," I said as she reached for the door handle. "This isn't over, but not in the way you think. Your desperation ends here. My life begins here, and those are two completely separate things." After she left, I sat quietly for several minutes, processing the encounter. Seeing Grace in such a diminished state should have given me satisfaction, but instead I felt only a profound sadness for the time and energy we had all wasted on such a toxic dynamic. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Nicholas entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression of concern. "My assistant mentioned you had an upset visitor earlier. Everything okay?" I accepted the coffee gratefully and gave him a brief summary of Grace's visit. His expression grew increasingly grim as I described her threats and accusations. "I am worried about this," he said when I finished. "People in desperate situations sometimes make very poor decisions. Have you considered getting a restraining order?" "Based on what?" "She didn't actually threaten me with physical harm, and she has a right to ask for financial help even if I have an equal right to refuse." "Dove, you don't understand. After our business relationship ended, Grace made some pretty serious accusations about me. She claimed I had promised to marry her, that I owed her money for services beyond what we had contracted, that I had led her on emotionally. Most of it was clearly fabricated, but she was very convincing when she wanted to be. This was news to me. What kind of accusations? She tried to claim that our entire business relationship was actually a personal relationship that I had ended unfairly. She demanded compensation for emotional distress and damage to her reputation. When I refused, she threatened to go public with lies about my character. I set down my coffee cup, suddenly understanding why Nicholas had been so eager to distance his company from Grace's scandal. What did you do? I had my lawyers send her a cease and desist letter, and I made it clear that any false statements would result in a defamation lawsuit. She backed down eventually, but only because she couldn't afford legal representation. If she is desperate enough to come after you, she might be desperate enough to try something similar. The implications were troubling. Grace had already demonstrated a willingness to manipulate the truth for her own benefit. If she was facing financial ruin, she might convince herself that attacking my reputation was justified revenge. I appreciate the warning, I said. But I am not going to let fear of what she might do control my decisions. I've spent too many years accommodating other people's emotional instability. Nicholas nodded, but his expression remained worried. Just promise me you'll be careful, and if she escalates things, don't try to handle it alone. I promised, touched by his genuine concern for my welfare. As he left my office, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically our relationship had evolved from that first antagonistic meeting. The man I had initially dismissed as another entitled playboy had proven to be thoughtful, principled, and surprisingly protective. But I couldn't afford to let personal feelings complicate my professional judgment, especially with so much uncertainty surrounding Grace's next move. I had worked too hard to build this new life to risk it for anyone, no matter how appealing they might be. The next few weeks passed peacefully, and I began to hope that Grace's visit had been an isolated incident. Our marketing campaign was exceeding all projected targets. My relationship with the Portland business community was strengthening, and I was genuinely happy for the first time in my adult life. Then I received a phone call that changed everything. Miss Kent, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Portland Police Department. We need to speak with you about some allegations that have been made against you. Could you come to the station at your earliest convenience? My blood ran cold. What kind of allegations? I'd prefer to discuss the details in person. How soon can you be here? I canceled my afternoon meetings and drove to the police station with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Whatever Grace had done, it was serious enough to involve law enforcement. I had a terrible feeling that my past was about to destroy everything I had built for my future. Detective Martinez was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She led me to a small interview room and offered me water before settling across from me with a thick file folder. Miss Kent, we've received a complaint alleging that you embezzled money from your family's business and used those funds to relocate to Portland and establish your new position. The complainant claims to have documentation proving that you stole approximately $50,000 over a 3-year period. I stared at her in shock. That is completely false. I've never had access to any family business accounts, and every dollar I've earned has been through legitimate employment. The complainant also alleges that you used your position with your current employer to interfere with her business relationships, specifically her contracts with Morrison Industries. She claims this constitutes harassment and intentional interference with her livelihood. I could barely process what I was hearing. Grace had somehow convinced the police that I was a criminal who had systematically destroyed her life out of jealousy and spite. The sheer audacity of her lies was breathtaking, but I could see how someone unfamiliar with our history might find her story credible. Detective. I have extensive documentation of my employment history, my financial records, and the legal process I used to establish independence from my family. I am happy to provide whatever proof you need to verify that these allegations are false. She nodded, making notes in her file. We'll need to see those documents. In the meantime, I have to ask that you not leave the Portland area while we investigate this matter. I called my lawyer immediately after leaving the police station. He assured me that the allegations were clearly frivolous and that we would have no trouble disproving them with proper documentation. But he also warned me that defending against false criminal charges could be expensive and time-consuming, even when the outcome was never really in doubt. More troubling was the potential damage to my reputation. If word of the investigation spread through Portland's tight-knit business community, it could undermine all the professional relationships I had worked so hard to build. I was so absorbed in my legal troubles that I didn't notice Nicholas waiting by my car until he called my name. Dove, I heard about the police investigation. This is insane. Grace can't seriously believe she is going to get away with filing false charges. How did you hear about it? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. She called me directly. She wanted me to corroborate her story about you interfering with our business relationship. When I refused, she started screaming about how I had betrayed her for her sister, and that she was going to make us both pay. The pieces were falling into place. Grace had constructed an elaborate revenge fantasy in which I had deliberately seduced Nicholas away from her and then used that influence to destroy her career. It was completely divorced from reality, but it gave her someone to blame for her problems besides herself. I am sorry you got dragged into this, I said tiredly. I never wanted any of my family drama to affect you. Don't apologize. This isn't your fault, and we're going to fight it together. He reached out and took my hand, and I was surprised by how much comfort that simple gesture provided. My lawyers are already working on a countersuit for defamation and filing false police reports. Grace picked the wrong people to mess with. As we stood there in the parking lot, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with Nicholas. What had begun as professional collaboration and grown into friendship was evolving into something deeper and more complicated. But I couldn't afford to explore those feelings while my entire future hung in the balance. Grace had forced me into another battle for my independence, and this time the stakes were higher than ever. The legal proceedings took 3 months to resolve, during which Grace's accusations became increasingly desperate and contradictory. Her supposed evidence of embezzlement turned out to be fabricated bank statements that were easily disproven by official records. Her claims of business interference fell apart when multiple witnesses confirmed that I had no involvement in Morrison Industries' decision to end their partnership with her. By the time the district attorney's office officially dropped all charges and began investigating Grace for filing false reports, her credibility was completely destroyed, but the damage to my peace of mind had already been done. I spent those 3 months constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering what fresh accusations might emerge and how far Grace was willing to go in her quest for revenge. The stress affected my sleep, my appetite, and my ability to focus on work. Nicholas was invaluable during this period, providing both emotional support and practical assistance. He helped coordinate between my legal team and the police investigation, used his connections to minimize gossip in the business community, and somehow managed to shield our marketing campaign from the worst of the drama. More importantly, he never made me feel like my problems were burdens he was obligated to carry. His support felt genuine rather than dutiful, as if helping me was something he wanted to do rather than something he felt he should do. When the legal nightmare finally ended, we celebrated at an expensive restaurant overlooking the Columbia River. The view was spectacular, the food was perfect, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. So what happens now? Nicholas asked as we shared dessert. Now I get back to building the life I want, I said. No more looking backward, no more being defined by other people's dysfunction. Just forward motion. And what does that life look like? I considered the question seriously. 6 months earlier, my vision of success had been entirely professional: career advancement, financial security, independence from my toxic family. But my relationship with Nicholas had introduced possibilities I hadn't previously considered. I am not sure yet, I admitted. I am still figuring out who I am when I am not defending myself against someone else's attacks. Take your time, he said gently. You've earned the right to choose your own path. As we drove back to my apartment that night, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that terrible birthday dinner that felt like a lifetime ago. I had lost a family that had never truly valued me and gained professional success beyond my wildest dreams. I had discovered inner strength I hadn't known I possessed and developed the first healthy romantic relationship of my adult life. Grace's final act of spite had been intended to destroy my new beginning, but instead it had proven how solid the foundation I had built really was. She had thrown everything she could at my reputation and my relationships, and nothing had cracked. Standing in my beautiful apartment, looking out at the lights of Portland spread below me, I felt something I had never experienced before. Complete peace with who I was and where I was going. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I hesitated, worried it might be another attempt by my former family to insert themselves into my life. But when I opened it, the message was from Emma, my old friend back east. Saw the news about the charges being dropped. So proud of you for fighting back. By the way, Grace was arrested last week for credit card fraud. Looks like you weren't her only victim. Hope you are living your best life out there. I set the phone down and smiled. Justice, it seemed, had found Grace through her own actions rather than any effort on my part. The universe had its own way of balancing the scales. Nicholas and I were married 2 years later in a small ceremony attended by the friends and colleagues who had become my chosen family. My parents and Grace were not invited, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that they had asked Emma for details about my wedding plans. I felt no sadness about their absence. The people who truly mattered were there to celebrate with us, and that was more than enough. During our honeymoon in Europe, Nicholas and I talked about starting a family of our own. The idea of becoming a mother both thrilled and terrified me. I had no positive role models for healthy parenting, no template for creating the kind of loving, supportive environment I wanted for my children. We'll figure it out together, Nicholas assured me. All we have to do is remember how it felt to be unheard and unseen and then do the opposite. It was such a simple principle, but I knew he was right. The pain of my childhood had taught me exactly what kind of parent I never wanted to be. That knowledge, combined with the love and stability Nicholas and I had built together, would be enough to break the cycle of dysfunction that had defined my family for generations. 5 years after our wedding, we welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Hope. Holding her tiny hand in the hospital, I made a promise that she would never doubt her worth. Never question whether she deserved love, never wonder if she was enough just as she was. The girl who had once eaten scraps from other people's plates had grown into a woman who could set her own table, invite her own guests, and create abundance rather than surviving on leftovers. It had been a long journey from that terrible birthday dinner to this moment of perfect contentment, but every struggle along the way had been worth it. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regret cutting ties with my family so completely. The answer is always no. Some relationships are worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth preserving despite their imperfections. But some relationships are simply toxic, and the healthiest thing you can do is walk away completely and permanently. Recognizing the difference between those two types of relationships might be the most important skill anyone can develop. I never heard from Grace, Luke, or Pearl again after the criminal charges were dropped. Occasionally, Emma would share updates about their continuing struggles with debt, health problems, and legal troubles. But these stories felt like news from a distant country rather than information about people who had once been central to my daily life. I felt no satisfaction in their misfortunes, but I also felt no obligation to rescue them from the consequences of their own choices. They had made their beds, as the saying goes, and now they would lie in them without any assistance from me. My story could have been very different if I had continued to accept their version of reality, if I had kept believing that my only value lay in making Grace feel better about herself. If I had never found the courage to flip that table and walk away from everything that had diminished me. But I did find that courage eventually, and it changed everything. The woman I became would be unrecognizable to the girl I once was, but she would also be proud of her. That girl survived impossible circumstances and preserved something essential inside herself until the day she was strong enough to claim the life she deserved. That, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all. You are never too old, too damaged, or too defeated to start over. You are never too entrenched in dysfunction to choose something better. You are never too small to flip the table and walk away from anyone who insists you should be grateful for crumbs. The girl who once ate scraps is now the woman who serves the feast. And every bite tastes like freedom.